So I invite you to hear the word of God as we read it together from Luke chapter 17. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." The word of the Lord. You may be seated. Thanksgiving is one of the most traveled times of the year. More than 55 million people will travel over 50 miles to be with friends and family and relatives. And it reminded me of one of my favorite children's books, a Caldecott Medal winning book by a lady named Cynthia Rylant called The Relatives Came. And it's about how seeing relatives come in for the holidays look through a child's eyes. And so one of the things that this child says is the relatives came, they poured out of their car, and they started hugging people from the front door all the way to the kitchen, crying as they went. And they ate up everything in the house like locusts. And then it came time to sleep, and they all slept on the floor because we didn't add any more beds. And some of them slept 4 people to a bed, filling up the whole house. It was really it's a great book if you ever get a chance to read it. And that's how Thanksgiving seems to many. It seems like a reunion, a time when we see other people we don't normally see, and we get together with others, and we celebrate traditions. We go back and eat turkey, and we eat cranberry sauce and dressing, things that we don't normally have every week. Sometimes you may have a special family tradition that you do. And one of the traditions that I hope will be a part of your life is to coming back to God to give thanks to Him. And I want to talk about the benefits of coming back to what is important today. Not just the turkey and dressing and the relatives, but coming back to God in thanksgiving. Gratitude is a tool from God that brings us back to Him, to our real roots, to our real hope for the future. Gratitude keeps us from navel gazing. It keeps us from being self-preoccupied. It keeps us from thinking that it's all about me, and it helps us to think about others, about other people in our lives. They may be far away, and they may be worth a phone call or a letter or a card, and it makes us think about God too. Because if someone says thanks to no one at all, it's kind of sad. When you say thanks ultimately to God, it's a way that you express your joy and a way that you redigest your life, and you celebrate the good things that you have experienced all over again in your life. And if we don't have anyone to thank, it's kind of sad. If we just pat ourselves on the back, it's kind of sad. It's great to give thanks ultimately to the one who gives us everything that we see. And that's what this passage is all about. Thanksgiving for what has happened is always a way to come back. Because when you thank somebody, for example, if you're writing a thank you note to someone, you have to rethink about the thing that happened to you. You have to go over it again in your mind and write it down on the paper and re-celebrate it, if you will, to give thanks for it. And when we count our blessings from God, it increases our joy in him and makes us appreciate him even more. In this passage, the 10 all came to Jesus initially. The 10 people had leprosy. Now, Luke records 5 major healing miracles in the Gospel of Luke, and this is the 4th one. And this is the only one where 10 people are healed all at once together. And they had a terrible disease, leprosy. Leprosy is like the opposite of the relatives came. It's where you're isolated. It's where you cannot see family and you cannot see friends because leprosy was so communicable that you didn't want to give it to somebody else, and you were told to stay outside of the city or outside the village. That's why the lepers met Jesus outside of the village in our passage today, because they were outside the city limits. They were banned from being inside where the rest of the people were. And it's very sad. Can you imagine if you get leprosy, you couldn't see your spouse? You couldn't see your new grandbaby? You couldn't see your nephews or your nieces or your cousins or your friends? You couldn't see anybody. The only person you could see were the other lepers. And leprosy affects your eyes. Usually lepers become blind. It affects your extremities so you can't feel things. You can't feel pain. And that is, we think if we don't feel pain, it's a blessing. But if you can't feel pain, it's a curse. So people with leprosy would put their hand into the fire when they're cooking their food, and they would burn their hand and not even know it was on fire. It's such a very sad, sad disease. It's a living death, if you will, and people with leprosy would die earlier than people who didn't have leprosy. But what's interesting in this passage is that these lepers came together to Jesus. There were 9 Jews and 1 Samaritan. Normally, Jews and Samaritans don't hang out with each other, but this leprosy brought them in unity to Jesus. And that's what sometimes bad things do. They make us united with people that we don't always agree with. When heartache and disaster comes, it unites us sometimes. So like when 9/11 happened, the nation was united. Democrat and Republican were together. And when Pearl Harbor happened, the nation was united. When Hurricane Hugo hit South Carolina, all of South Carolina seemed to be united in the need to rebuild and refocus and help neighbor. If you go back even further, you can see little revivals happened in the midst of the sadness of South Carolina. For example, in 1760, there was a severe smallpox breakout, and it killed about half the population of Charleston. And people swelled the churches during that time, asking God for help and for mercy, just like these 10 lepers came to Jesus asking for help together. So the people came together looking for God's mercy. Or when the flu hit in 1918, the severe pandemic of flu, it hit South Carolina, and 10% of the population of our state died during that flu epidemic, as in my grandfather's day. And the churches swelled with people who came to God asking God for mercy and for help. More recently, in 1946 and 1950, there was a polio outbreak in South Carolina. And 10% of our population got polio. And of that 10%, 10% of them died of polio. My brother got polio. My uncle got polio. Some members of our church got polio during that time. It affected thousands. Can you imagine hearing that the polio virus had begun to happen in our state and was spreading throughout different counties, and the fear that spread because of the polio coming to our area? But did you know that between 1946 and 1950, more Presbyterian churches were built than in any other 5-year span in our history? People were turning to God for help. And also in gratitude that World War II was over. The veterans are coming back grateful that they had survived, and they were looking to God in gratitude for his blessing as well. So when there's great need, we look to God. And what worries me a little bit is we have been so blessed. We've been so blessed with few diseases, few epidemics. The last one I remember was AIDS in the 1980s, and even then people called out to God. We have been so blessed that sometimes we take God for granted, and we forget his benefits. Like these 10 lepers, 9 of them forgot to come back to give thanks to Jesus. I don't doubt that they had their reasons. They had faith, by the way. They had faith in Jesus. They heard, this is at the end of Jesus' ministry. He had healed thousands of people. And the next chapter, Luke 18, he was entering into Jerusalem to die. And they had heard that he had healed, and doubtless their voices are raspy. That's another thing that happens with leprosy. It affects your voice box, so you talk like this. So they doubtless had practiced saying together in one voice, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Have pity or have compassion on us. And so they joined in, it says in one loud voice, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And he heard them. He turned toward them. And he said, go to the priest and you will be healed. And they believed Jesus enough to do what he said. And they left to go to the priest. And as they left to go to the priest, not far down the road, they were healed of their leprosy. And some probably just said, well, we're just going to continue to do what Jesus said, and we're going to go to the priest. But one of them, the Samaritan, said, I'm going back to say thank you. Why don't y'all come join me? No, we're going to go on to the priest. And then we're going to go see our family because we haven't seen them in years. And our friends, and my new grandbaby, and my nieces and my nephews. And their own agenda took more priority than giving thanks to the one who healed them. Do you know how to make Jesus sad? In our passage, you can read of his sadness. Listen to what Jesus said. When the one came back, who fell at his feet and gave thanks, Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Can you hear the sadness there? Where are the people to come back and worship, to come back to give thanks? Where are they? The ingratitude of the 9 hit Jesus hard. It wounded his heart. You know, we have a phrase for people who just get things but don't ever say thanks, and it's being spoiled, being ruined by the stuff that you get and not being grateful for it. Have you ever smelled a carton of milk that was out of date or tasted some milk that was out of date? Eek. You know, we ruin ourselves when we get stuff, but we're not grateful for it, and when we think we are entitled, and we take God, the giver of every perfect and good gift, for granted. Ingratitude does not just make God sad, it also takes away our own joy, our own ability to enjoy the blessings of life. When you say thank you to God, it multiplies the joy that you have. It lets you relive the joy. And gratitude is not something that we can kind of generate ourselves. It is a gift. It is gratis. Part of gratitude is gratis, which means free gift of grace. You can try to do some things to prime the pump of gratitude, but you can't really make yourself in your heart feel gratitude. It is a gift to be thankful, to be grateful. It's a gift when we are grateful for each other. and grateful for God. I want to tell you a little story. Will Smith, not the actor, but a regular person who was in the Navy, had heard that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant and was going to have his baby girl. The time was come to either re-enlist in the Navy or get out of the Navy. He decided to get out of the Navy so he could take care of his daughter who was about to be born. The mother became unstable and unable to care for the daughter, so Will decided to care for her, and he also decided he would use part of his GI Bill to go to college so he could support the daughter in the future. The problem was taking care of a baby while you go to college is a bit difficult. But he would take the daughter with him to class. He got special permission from the president and his teachers to do that. And he would have his roommates watch the daughter. He got special permission for the daughter to be in the dormitory with him. And he also worked at night at Staples, trying to support them. And he got special permission from the manager to bring his infant daughter with him to work at Staples while he worked there for a few years. He was very grateful for his daughter, and he said, I remembered my mother's prayer before she died, and it was, God, please give Will someone in his life to keep him from drifting. And he said, my daughter was my anchor that kept me from drifting. And when she grew up, she was so grateful that her father had taken care of her despite all the hardships of going to college and working while he was taking care of her. But when she was 16, Will got cancer. And he got very, very sick. And the roles switched. She ended up taking care of him. And she said, I'm so grateful for him. How can I not take care of him? And he was so grateful for her that she took care of him. We should be grateful to each other. And we should be grateful that God puts us in places where we can care for other people. Even the relatives who rub you the wrong way. Even the relatives who say the wrong thing. Even the relatives who are not sensitive to your need. Even the relatives who criticize you when you burn the turkey. You know, we rub each other the wrong way. That's part of being human. But let the love of God overcome that in your life. When Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, he said, but except for your relatives who rub you the wrong way. No, we're called to love our neighbor, and the closest neighbors we have are those that we see, that we know, and know us better than others. Coming back in gratitude is the main part of this passage today. The leper didn't just keep on going down the road, keep on with his agenda, keep on seeing his family and friends, but he went back to give thanks, and he worshiped Jesus, falling at his feet, recognizing his help in that, getting rid of that terrible hell-like condition. He was relishing in the joy, and Jesus appreciated his coming back so very much. In fact, he says this, the last part of the passage says, go, your faith has made you well. And it's kind of a curious phrase because he's already well, you know. He's already healed of leprosy. So what is Jesus trying to say? He's not just saying, oh, your faith made you well a few minutes ago. Go on about your life. I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's a second healing going on. A second healing. It's not just being healed physically from leprosy, the spots and the sores and all that. It's being healed in his heart. His gratitude to God healed his heart. And so Jesus could say to this one who came back, go, your faith in coming back has made you truly well. In fact, the word in the NIV translation, which is here, obscures the Greek word. The Greek word is salvation. Go, your faith has saved you, is how you can literally translate it. Go, your faith has saved you. So this leper was not just healed physically, he was healed also spiritually. And that's what gratitude does. It brings us back to God in worship and in thanksgiving, and then it heals our soul. If we can truly, freely, without reservation, without saying, but I remember that time, God, when you failed me, or I remember that sin that separates me from you, if we can just let go of that and give ourselves freely to God in thanksgiving, our faith can heal us on the inside as well. And it is contagious when you give thanks. It makes other people want to give thanks. I remember that, I love the Norman Rockwell for one thing, but there's an old picture of a young boy and his grandmother eating together in a restaurant, and the young boy and the grandmother have their hands folded and their heads bowed, saying grace, saying thank you to God. And all the other old guys are looking over them like, what are they doing? Saying thanks lets other people think about saying thanks too. Scott McCauley was 24 years old when his parents got divorced, and he couldn't go home for Thanksgiving. He didn't have a place to go. And so he didn't want to be alone at Thanksgiving, so he put an ad in the paper. And he said, if anybody is alone at Thanksgiving, give me a call and I will cook Thanksgiving meal for you. Well, that first Thanksgiving, about 8 people called, and they had a really good time together, and it really inspired his heart so that he became a member of First Baptist Church in Melrose, Massachusetts. And every year since, he had Thanksgiving at First Baptist Church, Melrose, Massachusetts, and every year he put an ad in the paper, and every year people would come. I think last year 84 people came to his Thanksgiving meal that he prepared for other people. Some people had no idea who he was. This skinny guy back in the back cooking, he said. But he said he remembered one lady who had Parkinson's disease, and she lived in a nursing home, had been in a nursing home by herself for 7 years. And she saw the ad in the paper, and so she hired an ambulance to come take her from the nursing home to go eat Thanksgiving with Scott. And when it came time for the ambulance to take her back, she started crying. She didn't want to go. Thanksgiving's about being with people and giving thanks together and being with God and giving thanks to Him. I love Thanksgiving. I hope you do too. And I hope that together we can come back to God in our heart of hearts, and our gratitude will bring us closer to God. Amen.